Mayor Caldwell, we are ready to rock and roll.
Okay, thank you very much, Cameron. I appreciate everybody being here and being with us. We're going to go ahead and start the Legislative Policy Committee meeting for May 24th, 2021. Again, we appreciate everybody's time and your commitment to the league and everything we're trying to do here. Thank you very much. We have one action item, which is the approval and adoption of the March 1st, 2021 minutes. Do we have a motion and or a second? Thanks, Kate. I appreciate that in the chat.
Give us a second.
Second from Mayor Niehaus. Thank you very much. We have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye. Now, looks like a load. We'll ask if there are any opposed.
I think you're all right, Mayor.
Hearing none, hearing no opposition to that, we'll go ahead and approve those minutes as they were submitted. Thank you very much. With that, Cam, I'll turn it back over to you and we can run through the rest of the agenda.
Terrific. Thank you, Mayor. And it's nice to see folks electronically here. We hope to be back to our normal hybrid LPC meetings later this summer, but it has been a very busy spring. You just adopted minutes from the last LPC of the session, which was just a few weeks ago, but in a way it doesn't feel like the legislature session actually ended. We've been at the Capitol multiple times, including last week for the special session and first interim. And if it feels like we're holding LPC a little earlier than normal, that's because we are. We normally do not hold LPC in May. We hold it in June. We moved it up several weeks this year because of the big issues that are circling and wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page about what's coming and how to engage in the weeks ahead. Before we jump into the policy details, though, I do feel like we need to address the elephant in the room, and that is that the Jazz cannot possibly play worse than they did for stretches of the game yesterday. And to show you that hope is still real here, I cracked out my old Jazz tie from the late 90s, back in the glory days of close but not quite. Yesterday wasn't even close, but everybody just take a deep breath. We'll get there. Donovan will be able to play, and we're not going to lose in the first round. Second round, maybe, but first round, I'm not going to go as far as guaranteeing we're going to win the first round, but we can't possibly play worse. So Mayor Caldwell, we don't need to take an official vote on that, but I felt like we just needed to address that right away today.
I appreciate the enthusiasm. Thank you very much. That's one thing that we and probably the legislature can all agree on at this point.
Amen. Amen. All right, so let's talk about then the policy objectives for today's meeting. As I mentioned, we've moved LPC up a few weeks. That's also because the legislature has tweaked their calendar for the interim. They will hold the interim meetings in June, on June 16th, but then they are not scheduled to have interim meetings in July or August. Usually they hold more summer meetings. They're not doing so this year for a couple of reasons. One, the last 2 years have basically been nonstop through the summer with tax reform and then COVID last year. They also are anticipating a huge amount of legislative time and bandwidth for redistricting in the fall. So come September, they'll be back on that monthly schedule. They'll be doing a lot of hearings around redistricting, which of course will affect cities to a degree. So at this point, they're not planning to meet during July and August. That's in part also why we moved our LPC meeting up, is because we've got updates today, and there'll be a lot of work in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And then most of the work will be occurring behind the scenes in July and August, and then the LPC will meet again in August. And the LPC never meets in July, so we'll continue with that. Here's what we need to accomplish today. So we hope that by the end of this meeting, by 1:30, This will be a springboard for you about how to talk to your legislator on the American Rescue Plan and how your city plans to invest those dollars. Also, how your city is planning for growth and how the legislature can partner with you on housing, land use, economic development, and tax policy. And then third, public safety policy. A lot of great consensus during the 2021 session, a lot of moving parts for the 2022 session. Carson, you can go to the next slide. Here's a key takeaway. We'll talk about our CitiesWork campaign that we're officially kicking off today, and we'll have those materials ready this week. Rest assured, if you don't tell your story about what's happening at City Hall and in your community, someone else will. And I'll just give a quick anecdote. I was at the Capitol all day on Wednesday for the special session, and I was there with one of our city attorneys, and one of his legislators wanted to meet. And we spent over an hour talking about the role of business licensing and why cities license and what we do. And it really turned into this fundamental conversation about why cities exist and why we do what we do. And he had heard from some frustrated residents, and he had his own ideas about why cities did things. And by the end of the meeting, he just thanked us for taking the time to walk him through why cities do what we do. If you don't proactively tell the story of how cities work, others will tell the story, and it's going to be incomplete. And it's going to have negative political consequences and ramifications on cities. So we all need to do our part to communicate with legislators and tell the story of what's happening in your cities and execute the CitiesWork plan. Carson, next slide. Here's how we intend to help. Over the last couple of months, we have been gathering input from you, from the League board, and from everyone within the League extended family. During this meeting, we'll explain to you what our primary housing data research goals are going to be, infrastructure costs, public safety, and the like. So we'll be assembling that big picture information that will help you communicate with legislators. Obviously, we'll continue with our meetings with legislators and stakeholders and the media. As we provide those big picture data points, then you need to provide the specifics and the details of what's going on in your community. So it has to be that tag team approach so that legislators hear that complete story. So we wanted to frame today's meeting with those key takeaways and objectives. And with that, Wayne, I'll turn it over to you to talk about where things are at with the American Rescue Plan.
Thanks, Cam. So as you're all aware, the American Rescue Plan provided funding for every local government across the state and across the country. This is a direct allocation. It is not competitive. And so you're entitled to a portion of the American Rescue Plan dollars. If you are a city of larger than 50,000 residents, then you can apply directly to the Treasury today. If you are fewer than 50,000 residents, your allocation will come from the state of Utah, and more information will follow. Okay. Okay, it sounds like I'm having a mic issue. I will call in just 1 second.
Wayne, as you call in, I'll do like we did last week here as you call in. So David saying your mic is fine, but I had a few others who were texting me saying they had difficulties. So nevertheless, Wayne will be back in 30 seconds. So you can see the Treasury guidance here. We did a town hall last week for 75 minutes that's available on the website with GOPB, Representative Spenlove, and others. So that town hall is now available on our website so that you can access that information. These are the 5 general buckets. Carson, you can go to the next slide. Within those general buckets, there are restricted uses and recommendations. One thing to emphasize is that the information the Treasury has released is still tentative. It's a draft rule. It'll be finalized within the next 8 weeks. And so we are providing feedback through the National League of Cities to the Treasury Department as they are taking the 150 pages and working toward implementation. Wayne, are you Are you back? No, okay. Within the guidance, we have broken it down, and you can see it in the PowerPoint from last week's town hall. We've broken down the guidance by different sections. So the water section, what's allowed and what's restricted, so on and so forth. Wayne, are you there?
Yes, I'm back.
Okay, take it away.
Okay, so as Cam covered, there's the approved sections that you can use your ARP funds for, and then there are restrictions in which you cannot use them for. So pensions, rainy day accounts, you cannot use it for debt services or settlements. And then if you are going to look at using it for water, infrastructure, broadband, or sewer, the guidance has made reference to having labor agreements or prevailing wages, and they are going to have more guidance and require additional reporting on these infrastructure projects. So make sure you watch for that further guidance. Next slide. So what you do need to know is that this money is looking forward from March 3rd to 2021. There was some question about whether you could be able to compensate or pay yourself for previous water or sewer infrastructure projects. Treasury interprets it as looking forward. The one or two exception is premium pay for your employees or for private sector employees and revenue loss. You have until 2024 to obligate the funds, but you have until 2026 to fully spend the dollars. So consider that as you're planning your spending. There is reporting, so every entity that receives funding will need to produce some type of report. Reporting requirements are larger for your metropolitan communities, but for anyone that's less than 50,000 residents, you will have to submit an annual report to Treasury by October of every year until 2026. So your record keeping and your documentation is important as you have new elections and staff changes, that there is someone within your city or town that knows that these reports are due, and of course we'll send reminders. Next slide. So there are in the special session, the state set aside 2 different pots of money for local governments to be able to access. The first one is a $50 million state matching grant program that will be housed in GOPB, the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget. There's a selection committee. The league has one of those seats that will be part of that process. And then you just have to come with a complete application explaining your project that meets the ARP guidelines, and also have a matching component. And then depending on this selection committee, you could get additional dollars from the state to complete projects in your communities. More information will follow as GOPB puts that grant program together. The second grant program is going to Go Utah, or what was formerly GoEd. This is a $35 million pot, and this is for encouraging changes in zoning in your community. So if you have an industrial or commercial zone in which somebody has asked for a zone change to residential or mixed residential, if you move forward with that process, have a minimum of 8 units per acre, you can get up to $2.5 million from the state to also do support housing in your community under the ARPA guidelines. So more information will come as GoEd puts that program together. But again, state set aside $50 million and $35 million specifically for local governments. And so we'll have more details as that comes to fruition. Next slide. We recognize that there is a lot of requirements. There's a lot of guidance that will be changing throughout this ARP process. And so the board has approved, the league board has approved the league asking for a portion of your ARP dollars to hire a full-time employee to be that technical assistance to the communities across our membership. So we are going to be meeting with the City Managers Association to discuss the rollout and implementation of this. We're also trying to meet with the municipal clerks. But again, the board has approved us asking for a portion of your ARP dollars to be able to provide the technical assistance, data collection, and other resources that you'll need throughout the process through the coming years. So watch for more information, but again, we'll be meeting with city managers and municipal clerks to discuss this.
Perfect. Thank you, Wayne. And the reason we wanted to start the interim discussion with ARP is because that truckload of federal money that's going to be flowing into the state in the months to come is going to be invested in many cases around infrastructure and planning for growth at the state level and at the local level. So virtually every conversation we're having with legislators around planning for growth, ARP comes up, and the idea of trying to better coordinate and collaborate on ARP investment and how to utilize these dollars for generational type projects. And one of the obstacles in years past just obstacles in general to growth is the cost of infrastructure. And is there then a way to utilize ARP dollars to facilitate planning for growth and accommodating growth in ways that were otherwise difficult, if not impossible? Paul, you asked a question about elaborating on the use of funding for rezones. That seems strange. Wayne, if it's okay, let me just take a moment to address Paul's question, and then I'll also reference that other $50 million fund that Wayne referenced. So again, there are the two funds. Carson, actually, we skip it back just so people can have the visual of the two different funds. Fund number one is through GOPB. That's the 50 million. There's the possibility that that number could increase. There'll be a 5-member selection committee. League will be on it, and really the concept here is using Paul's city as an example. Of Brigham City has a portion of local dollars, whether that's property tax money or ARPA money or both, and you're looking to do something that's an allowable ARPA expense, then you can apply for a state match to invest in that project. The 35 million is through GOED. At this point, we're still following with GOED about the framework, but the concept here is that if, again, using Brigham City as an example, if Brigham City had an area that is currently zoned commercial or industrial, and the city was looking to rezone it, and there was an application for the zone change, and someone who was seeking a building permit in order to proceed with a residential or a mixed residential use on that site that met certain criteria, then the state would chip in dollars to help support housing and infrastructure in accordance with ARPA. Now, Paul, if you were to go back and read SB 1001, which is where this bill, or which is where this language originated, I've more or less told you everything that's in it. Thus far, we've had several conversations with the chairs of the Commission on Housing Affordability and with GOED is trying to figure out what does this actually look like and what's the framework for it. So certainly welcome input about how to make sure when the meat gets put on the bones in the weeks to come, and that it's something that's workable. The same goes for the $50 million grant program too. We're sitting down with Sophia in the next week or two to start putting the meat on the bones of what that matching grant program will actually look like. She's under a statutory deadline to have that grant up and running by September. I don't recall if there was a date in the statute for the GOED grant, but either way, we'll be working through the implementation. So hopefully, Paul, that answers your question there. But these are two buckets from the state ARPA funds that are also separate from planned state investment into water infrastructure and planned state investment into housing and elsewhere. The state has nearly $2 billion of ARPA dollars. And then there may even be additional federal dollars coming if Congress passes an infrastructure package. So a lot of moving parts with federal money right now. I don't see any other questions, Carson, so let's jump back to the interim preview. Oh, Shannon popped in. Does this disincentivize economic development in areas where it's needed? Shannon, I think or council member, I think there's always the risk that when you start putting different grants or incentives together, that it does start to steer the market one way or another. And that's where we certainly welcome the input of elected officials and economic development professionals as we put the meat on the bones to these programs. It's also a great segue, council member, to what we expect in the upcoming 10 months. So this is a grid that outlines all of the issues that are out there right now that are either before interim committees or already have bill files open. You can see them in the high level categories. So Councilmember Ellsworth referenced economic development and incentives and alignment. And there's going to be this Economic Development Commission, the Unified Economic Development Commission, which we'll talk about in a moment. Everything that we've highlighted in red fits within this general context of growth and housing affordability and planning for the future. So all of those have come, even though they're in the different silos on your screen, they all come up in that same general category. What I've highlighted in blue, water conservation, we're not going to spend a lot of time today talking about water conservation, but it's clearly on the forefront of everybody's mind because of the massive drought conditions across the state. The legislature's looking at potential actions. I applaud many cities who in recent weeks have communicated with their residents about implementing smart watering practices and doing their part at a local level. I saw some great quotes from Mayor Frost and American Fork over the weekend on that front. So there will be a lot more to come on the water conservation front. One of the things the state's looking at with ARPA dollars, for example, is maybe another matching fund through DEQ for secondary water metering. So a lot of moving parts in the water conservation space. Wayne Bradshaw, our policy director, is part of the Water Collective that will be working on potential recommendations here in the weeks to come. And so again, stay tuned for more updates there, even though we won't go into great detail in today's meeting. Likewise, on homelessness, we're not going to spend really much time today on homelessness, but with the hiring of former Senate President Wayne Niederhauser to be the homelessness coordinator and director for the state of Utah, there's going to be a greater concerted effort for better coordination and collaboration. And we've already had conversations, in fact, just as recently as last week, about what this could mean for the Public Safety Mitigation Fund that cities contribute to, whether or not there could be an additional homeless shelter site, whether that's a permanent site or a rotating site. So stay tuned on those pieces. As you can see, there's a lot to come. And this is why, in part, it feels like the session hasn't really ended, even though they stopped meeting the first week in March. Carson, you can move to the next slide here. Here's what has happened even just since we saw you at the mid-year conference. Legislative leadership delivered a message to the Commission on Housing Affordability that it was time to do something significant with cities around land use and housing. And just last Monday, Mayor Caldwell, as league president, and the league board hosted a discussion with the two co-chairs from the Commission on Housing Affordability, Senator Jake Andrig and Representative Steve Waldrop. They were very upfront with us and with the league board, and that they wanted the league at the table, but that there was a lot of pressure to make significant changes to how cities govern their land use, municipal revenue structures, and other things that could potentially result in the development of more housing. They also made it clear that they did not have a predetermined outcome in mind, that they were seeking what they refer to as wish lists from all of the different stakeholders on the commission, and they wanted a wish list from the league board, and the league board deliberated over potential ideas, and Victoria will talk about those in a moment. Likewise, we have the Land Use Task Force, and we have that Unified Economic Opportunity Commission that will start meeting after July 1. So there are a lot of moving parts right now that are all in this growth space around economic development and housing, local land use, and the like. Again, a huge takeaway for you from today's meeting is you need to talk to your legislators now about the specifics that are occurring in your city. We need to talk about how your city can partner with the state. We need to talk about the concerns you're hearing from residents, and you need to talk about the infrastructure pressures and other realities that you're facing on the ground as you are planning for population growth. As the state adds the equivalent of a city of Taylorsville every year, you need to make sure legislators understand that you get it, you're on the front lines of that growth, and here are all the pressures that are coming to you, so they have a better understanding of how proactive cities are being around growth. So Carson, go to the next slide. So you'll see this concept of Officers Plus. So in between league board meetings, we as staff, per league bylaws and the Constitution, rely on the league officers to provide that implementation direction as well as the strategy. So during the session, for example, I did a weekly call with the officers and we would talk through different bills and politics and the like. Well, as we have surveyed what's coming this summer, you can see these 3 different external groups, all of which have league involvement, are looking at growth in cities: the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission, Commission on Housing Affordability, and the Land Use Task Force. Within the Land Use Task Force, you have the negotiators, which are the representatives from the Property Rights Coalition, as well as representatives from the League and UAC. And you have our home team, which consists of staff and electeds from around the state. In an effort to better coordinate all of this, we proposed to the League Board last week, and they approved the creation of this Officers Plus group. So as part of this, within the Land Use Task Force, we'll be shifting that home team to primarily email communication, but we'll have this Officers Plus group to try to coordinate our advocacy efforts in these 3 groups. So Carson, next slide, please. So the Officers Plus are the 5 officers. You know them well. You've seen their faces on screens quite a bit over the last couple of years. But Mayor Caldwell, Mayor Ramsey of South Jordan, Mayor Silvestrini of Mill Creek, Bountiful City Manager Gary Hill on behalf of the City Managers Association, and former League President, Councilmember Mike Mendenhall. So in addition to those 5, we're going to bolster them with the League representatives on the Commission on Housing Affordability and the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission, with the team leaders of our negotiating team on the Land Use Task Force, and then a few other elected officials, economic development professionals, and planners. So again, the idea here is being consistent with our structure as a league, but making sure that the officers are surrounded by that additional expertise, provide that policy and political strategy, implement the board's general direction on these issues, and coordinate the advocacy across all of these groups with league staff. So when you hear us in the weeks and months to come talk about Officers Plus, this is the backstory, the thought process, and the context for it. So now that I've laid that out, Victoria, I will turn it to you to talk about the specific challenges that we're facing in the policy arena around growth and housing. And if you have thoughts or feedback about anything, feel free to drop it in the chat box and we'll address it. So I see there are a couple there that I'll just address, Victoria, while you take over.
Okay, thanks, Cam. And I want to make sure everyone is wished a happy Victoria Day from my Canadian friends out there. Not that I am Canadian, but I find this to be a very, very important day on the calendar. So these philosophical questions that we've put up on the screen are the questions that we're trying to drive home to the Commission on Housing Affordability chairs. Like, if we're going to get into some really difficult policy questions about housing, then let's look at these difficult questions and frame that discussion. And on top of that is who should pay for growth, the new or current residents. Long time the legislature's policy has been to put some of those costs on new residents. But as we're expanding quickly and there's stressors on infrastructure and everything that comes with growth, who is supposed to pay for that? The state has been very successful at developing our economy. I mean, we're very fortunate to live in a state that has done as well as it has this past year and over the past several years. But economic development success has its own frustrations and problems. And so how do we align those strategies with housing, transportation, land use, and tax policy? What are the infrastructure challenges and costs related to growth? As you all know, infrastructure is not free, and sometimes legislators forget this. So, if we're going to look at density, it doesn't necessarily mean it's affordable. What is the problem we're trying to solve? The lack of starter homes, and if so, how do we play a role to address it? The commission members, I should say the commission chairs, have made it clear that they primarily see our current housing problem as we need more units. We have pushed back that it's more complicated than that, And we would encourage all of you to be asking that question and these questions up here to your legislators. What's the line on state versus local control? Senator Andrick, who is co-chair of the commission, brought this up at the last commission meeting. And I think it's a question we need to keep asking over and over again. And we need to remind legislators that cities have limited keys over the timing of housing stock, but no control over market forces. And we've seen some of that in the chat. The cost on labor and materials has skyrocketed this year, and cities do not control that, and legislators need to be reminded about that. And how do we collectively address the concerns that residents have about these negative impacts? Many of you have sat through some difficult city council meetings and have heard your residents' concerns, and we need a better way collectively to talk about these concerns and address those when we hear from our current residents. Cam, I don't know if you wanted to, if there were any in the chat that I missed that you wanted to answer.
I'm typing responses to them now, so I'll speak up if I think something needs to be described.
Okay.
Orally. Thanks.
I'll keep going then. Thanks. So as Cam mentioned, we approached our board, and in response to the request from the Commission on Housing Affordability, started to put together a wish list of what we hope the Commission will consider. This is a very bird's eye view of some of the issues that were brought up, but none of them should surprise any of you. We do think transparency in construction costs, especially to recognize those market forces, is important. The infrastructure discussion has to continue. Legislators need to better understand what you are all facing in trying to build out this infrastructure as the growth is coming. The resident concerns, again, the impact of state economic development. Water, of course, is particularly this year, but every year is going to continue to be an issue as our state grows. Unused density. We've heard from some of you that you have allotted density to developments in your areas, and then it goes unused. And we think that's a discussion that needs to happen. Short-term rentals are another example of sometimes the legislature's left hand doesn't always listen to its right hand. Yes, we want affordable housing, but short-term rentals, primarily in some of our resort communities, can impact that affordability. And there are many other issues that we're putting together on a final wish list to give to the Commission. The Commission chairs will probably decide what the dialogue is going to look like at the Commission, but we want to make sure that since they have extended this offer for us to submit our wish list, that they make sure they hear, you know, the big picture surrounding the housing affordability debate. All right, Carson, if you will go to the next slide. So we have been hearing from many of you. We've heard in sidebar conversations, we heard at mid-year that we really need to combat some of the dialogue that's happening in this policy space. So we will be issuing RFQs this week based on what we've heard from you to complete the narrative with some better data. We heard in the political subdivisions interim committee some statistics that presenters presented from the National Association of Home Builders on the city's share of costs to construction on a national basis, and we feel like we need to come back with better data to combat some of the statistics to make sure we're all talking about what's actually happening here in Utah, not necessarily what's happening in Vermont or Louisiana or some other place. So we are issuing these RFQs, and you can see them listed there. And we want to look at costs. We want to make sure there is a clear understanding among policymakers of what the actual costs for each of the inputs for a house and how that impacts price. The second is we're looking at other influences on availability, housing starts versus entitled units, labor, lumber, short-term rentals, all that stuff, and investors. I just saw a comment in the chat. We are seeing an uptick of out-of-state or in-state investors buying into the housing market as investment properties. And then, of course, rising public infrastructure costs. While the cost of materials goes up for builders, it's also going up for you as cities. And so we want to make sure we have good data to give to policymakers to help round out this picture. If there are other data points that you think that we need to look into, will you please put those in the chat box, where you're welcome to email Carson. And Carson has just put his offer in there as well. So please let us know. We are issuing these particular RFQs this week because we want to make sure we've got this data as quickly as we can as the debate and conversations continue throughout the interim. Carson, if you would go to the next. Oh, go ahead, Cam.
Victoria, I just want to go back, Carson, to the research slide one more time. I just want to emphasize two things here. We've spent the last 2 months listening to you, our members. We have had multiple board meetings during that time. We had our caucus meetings at the mid-year conference. We received a slew of emails and texts and phone calls because we're all trying to figure this out, right? Like, we all have an interest, whether you're a city council member, the governor, business owner, resident, we all have an interest in making sure that Utah remains a phenomenal place to live, do business, and raise our families. And this feels like a tipping point, and that we've been building up to it over the last few years. And so it's over the last few weeks that we've kind of put together this housing research plan, put together the city's work plan, because ultimately, legislators need to know that we're all partners toward that outcome of the quality of life of residents today and tomorrow, and that we want to work together. But we also need them to understand the pressures you're facing at City Hall and not have this narrative that was really prevalent during the session of cities are obstacles to growth. Specifically, Councilmember Bloxham from Layton had a great comment in the chat box where he said the makeup of the legislature and the lack of municipal experience is at the root of many of these top-down approaches, and we should have an even greater incentive to share our stories so they understand the complexity of the problems that we're all trying to solve. The point he makes is a really valuable one about the makeup of the legislature. When I started the league, which now feels like eons ago, but I started in 2006. At that point, about 40% of the legislature had served in local government. As of today, that number, particularly in the House of Representatives, hovers around 10%. So there is that huge gap of understanding. Layton's one of the lucky ones. So, council member, you're one of the lucky ones because Representative Handy was on the Layton City Council, and Senator Jerry Stevenson was the former mayor of Layton. Most cities don't have that sort of institutional knowledge within their legislative delegation, which means we have to build it. And you have to take advantage of your relationships with those legislators. And it will start with the relationship, building the relationships of trust and telling your story. And then it will need to turn into a relationship built on accountability and understanding. And Victoria will talk about that in a moment when we get to CitiesWork. Carson, I see more thoughts coming in the chat box, so I'll let you just keep track. I'll let you keep track of those. But I wanted to specifically reference Councilmember Bloxham's points because I thought they were spot on. So Carson, with that, I think we can move to the next slide and pivot to public safety with the understanding that if you have thoughts on growth, throw them into the chat box.
Want me to take off on the public safety there, Cam?
Yep, giddy up, John.
Okay, thank you. Last week we met with, of course, our public safety issues are ongoing. Last week we met with our Love, Listen, Lead task force, who, just for your information, the co-chairs are Spanish Fork Council member, former president of the league, Mike Mendenhall, and also the new UCOPA president, West Jordan Police Chief Ken Wallentyne. We're so excited to have him there, and he's just done a great job. And so we're excited to be working with him. The members, of course, Loveless and Lead Task Force, attorney elected officials, managers, police chiefs. Over the last session, we had 20 consensus bills passed, and the exciting thing about that is all of those were done with full collaboration. We feel like with the league, with the Loveless and Lead Task Force, with LELC, which is the Law Enforcement Legislative Committee, and the Chief of Police Association. I'm not going to go into all of those, but I just put in the chat room that link that's at the bottom, and that's about a 1-hour webinar that we put together with Cameron and Ashley and Dave Spatafor and myself, and you can go over all those. So that's where we are on the Loveless and Lead Task Force. Last week we went through and prioritized several of the issues, and a lot to tackle. If you just go to the next slide, please. We're working hand in hand with the LELC, which is Law Enforcement Legislative Committee. They have 5 working groups, and how we've worked that out with those is we're working with both the police chiefs and ourselves, our Loveless and Lead Task Force, and we're assigning our representatives in each of those work groups. They go from everything from recruitment and retention to grandma issues and things like that. And so we'll be working hand in glove with those as we go through the next several months. Of course, advocacy groups are still pushing bills. We'll see a lot of bills that we agree with, and probably a lot that we don't agree with. And so that's still going on. Last year, the Department of Public Safety had what they call the Big Tent meetings with Commissioner Anderson, and how that's going to continue. And that is bringing a whole lot of the stakeholders together in probably a bigger form than we're trying to address with our Loveless and Lead. But they're trying to make that a more working, a group that can work together a little better and move forward. Cam, I don't know if you want to comment on that. That's kind of with you and Chief Valentine working on the Big Tent meetings.
Sure, I'll briefly mention how it worked last year. So last year, Commissioner Anderson put that group together during the summertime, and then our Loveless and Lead Task Force essentially met in between Big Tent meetings. So the Big Tent meeting would say, at our next meeting, we're going to talk about what sort of training requirements we should consider for law enforcement officers. At the time, Chief Ross, who was the Bountiful Police Chief, he and I would take that back to the Loveless and Lead Task Force. We would deliberate, and then the feedback from the Loveless and Lead Task Force, we became the messengers. We would take that back to the Big Ten meeting, and the deliberation would continue at the Big Ten meeting. By the time the session rolled around, Commissioner Anderson acknowledged that the Big Ten had basically, the Big Ten needed to be reconfigured in some form. And so he pressed pause on it through the session, and now he's trying to figure out where its role should be in light of what the Law Enforcement Legislative Committee is doing, and in light of the different policy issues that are coming. So I met with him at his office a couple of weeks ago, and Chief Valentine met with him last week, and I was on a call with him again this morning. So we expect that to start up. We started Loveless and Lead again last week just to get started for the interim. And as soon as we have more details about what Commissioner Anderson will do at the Big Ten, we'll let you know. And then Chief Valentine, as president of UCOPA, and I will continue engaging in the Big Ten on behalf of the league and the chiefs of police.
Thank you. And of course, if it's not enough us worrying about all the bills passed by our legislature, Congress is considering several police bills. You probably heard of the George Floyd bill that's before Congress, that includes things like qualified immunity, which is a big issue, officer misconduct database, which would work a lot like we did in recent legislation that was passed, that we can, if an officer messes up one place, that he just can't gravitate to another state, is what the Congress is working on. Of course, we're working on that not only with our Congress people who we work with a lot. We're also working on it through the National League of Cities to make sure we have influence on that. And Cameron, our executive director, in fact, is on a task force with the National League of Cities. Again, our priorities: recruitment and retention strategies. Wayne Bradshaw is working with Representative Gwynn on a survey dealing with that. It's been very interesting to us to look at the data as it's come in. It's not finalized yet. I think we'll be able to, in a few weeks when that's finalized, be able to get you the information. It looks like right now the big issue, even though it seems to be really pushing toward a lot of the pressure we're getting is pushing toward additional incentives for retirement. That really, it looks like to us, pay is a big issue. Garrity Grandma State Records Committee recently met, and they in a few cases that was before them, they granted the appeal to Salt Lake Tribune to release some of the Garrity conversations that had taken place in critical incidents throughout the state, which we think is a horrible thing. And Garrity, you know, we can probably go into what that means, what that looks like in more detail at another time. But that's something that we're concerned about a lot. And of course, grandma issues also are dealing with body-worn cameras. A lot of people want, a lot of the advocacy groups out there want body-worn cameras and a strict deadline on releasing a video, which is sometimes an issue, especially an issue for some of our smaller communities. Qualified immunity is out there. Well, it's something that I'm sure that we're going to have to address in some way, shape, or form as we come by. One of the big things we're working on right now is with CCJJ Director Tom Ross, former police chief of City Bountiful, so we know that he's a city guy, so he has things going. The meeting today with some of the interested parties, they've been tasked, CCJJ has been tasked with creating a report that says what kind of data we need to start collecting on public safety. And I think he's going around that very wisely, in that meeting with a lot of we're helping them, in fact, get some members of that committee that actually understand data collection. And so we don't create this big wish list of things that we want to collect data on, that it's just not possible to do that. And so I think that's going to work out really well, but they do have a strict timeline to have that done by November. And we'll continue to work on that. And of course, part of the issue with data collection that we are concerned about is why we love data. And we think a lot of these decisions we're talking about are truly data driven, we'll make good decisions. At the same time, we're concerned about an unfunded mandate that's going to cost cities a lot of money to collect data just for to get to this, to roll over to the state so we can collect those kind of things. So we're kind of walking through that and trying to figure it out. One of the things we did talk about when LLL is perhaps we ought to come up with a series of town hall meetings on some of these subjects to be able to take 20-30 minutes to go do a deeper dive, one of which was civilian advisory boards. As I'm sure you're aware, not only that there is pressure, not only nationally, but locally, for us to create some civilian advisory boards. And even though they take all kinds of shapes and forms, one of the things we thought would be pertinent would be to have a town hall meeting and just invite various cities that have some kind of civilian input on their police departments and look at the various ways they work and try to educate everyone, including myself, I think, about how some of those work. Some of the things we're monitoring, of course, is bail reform, no-knock warrant. You'll see the list there. 988 status. There's a new commission, actually an expanded commission with new duties to deal with the 988 call-in mental health crisis line that we we look forward to working with them, but we want to make sure that works hand in glove with our 911 system. So you see, there's a lot of work to do. We've done a lot. I truly believe that the 20 items that we passed in the last legislature were really the low-hanging fruit, and it's going to be as we go on. A lot of these details get harder. They get more intrusive to the way we've done business as usual, and we've just got to continue to work on them, to work with both our police departments, all of our cities, and with state and some of those advocacy groups. So with that, if there's any questions, be happy to answer that. Thanks, Cam. Back to you.
John, as we give people space to potentially put questions in the chat box, thank you for all of your work behind the scenes here. When I look at what we did in Utah during the 2021 session compared to what we're seeing in other states, and yet again, it's an example of the special sauce that makes Utah great. I was on the National League of Cities call last week, and I was chatting with city officials from different states and the battles they're having with their state governments over ARP dollars and battles over public safety. And they were that I could report that in our case, the state had set aside ARP dollars for matching funds with local governments and wanted to collaborate. They were blown away that we had 20 consensus bills that had the support of the law enforcement community, local governments, and community stakeholders. So I think we should, even though we're hitting you with a lot of information, I think we should all feel really pleased about the fact that we live in the state of Utah where collaboration is our middle name. I want to reference just two research objectives that we have here. They're not on the slide, but they're important for you to know. John referenced Representative Gwynn's survey that our policy director, Wayne Bradshaw, is spearheading around recruitment and retention of officers. That's the top priority within the Love, Listen, Lead. Really seeing some interesting trend lines emerge from that data. That data will be shared with the Law Enforcement Legislative Committee as well as the Law Enforcement Interim Committee. We've also already met with the chair of the Law Enforcement Interim Committee about the Garrity and Grandma issue, and we're very concerned about the impacts there. The second survey I want to bring up deals with getting a better understanding of what's happening on the ground in our police departments. 5+ years ago, we did a comprehensive survey in conjunction with the Chiefs of Police Association, where we asked questions about recruitment and retention. We asked questions about body-worn cameras. We asked questions about the data collection that was occurring. And that data was very helpful last summer as we put the task force together and started working on those 20 bills. We are partnering again with the Chiefs of Police Association to update that survey. So that survey will go out in the next few weeks. We'll make sure that you're aware so that you can make sure that your police chief and whoever in your city can submit that data, again, to help inform the deliberation that will be occurring in all of these different subgroups. So stay tuned for that survey. It'll be coming to an email box near you. I don't see any public safety related questions in the chat room. So John, well done. You were question free.
Yeah, that means either that I covered everything or I didn't cover enough. So I'm not sure, but thanks.
I'll assume I'm up. Just a few items on revenue issues that we see coming up this interim. I've looked forward to the year that we're not anticipating a discussion about the 50-50 distribution formula. That is not going to be this year. The 50-50 is been made a discussion item for revenue and taxation. And as alluded to earlier, it's actually part of the discussion associated with housing. The implication is, and I'll ask for a certain amount of understanding how many times we go over this stuff with the legislators over the years. We constantly deal with the perception that if land is zoned for something other than housing, the implication is that any commercial and or retail has somehow been driven by some sort of an adverse incentive. So the implication is if you change the formula to eliminate any point of sale incentive, that somehow more housing will be developed. I think that's a debatable premise. I don't think that there's anything per se inappropriate about cities planning for commercial in their communities, but that becomes sort of the essence of what the ongoing debate is. And so that's sort of the discussion. Do you shift it to more of a population and away from a point of sale? And that debate's been going on for about 35 years. The question is we're seeing an enormous amount of housing development that's taken place. So obviously something housing has been developed, but communities, I don't think have inappropriately also plan for their commercial. And I come back to something that was said before. Your cities don't build anything in terms of that regard. The developers make the decision, or the company owners. Everybody would love to have a Costco. Costco is going to make the decision of where it's going to go, not the city. So anyway, this item's been back on the discussion plate again. It's the same discussions we've had over and over again. I think the concern this particular time around is to understand that it's now much more linked to the focus on housing affordability, which I think is somewhat of a debatable premise. Now, you'll note I have Senator Bramble's name up here, and was on the other sheet as well. I don't want to malign Senator Bramble. He has actually been quite supportive of our efforts. But part of the answer to this question is 2 years ago, SJR 8 was passed, which asked the league and the sales tax levying entities to undertake a study to see whether the internet taxation had shifted the revenue sourcing location and what were the impacts of that. Now that's a lot of jargon. What that means is every sale takes place is sourced to a place. When you walk out of the store, that place is the store. But if you buy something from Amazon or from any other online vendor, the destination, the source where the point of sale is actually your front porch or wherever you have the boxes delivered. And so in effect, we have seen a shift of items that may have formerly been purchased in a store, in a retail location, and have now that source is now to your home, as well as items that were previously not taxed at all that are sourced to your home. Well, the question that Senator Bramble raised is big ticket items can be done that way. Cars, for example. Has that had a noticeable impact on the revenue allocation or the sales tax revenue that cities that were formerly that had a large presence of retail, have they seen a shift? The problem is when that bill was passed, COVID hit at the same time. And frankly, we sort of blew apart the previous dynamics of sales tax sourcing. Obviously, a whole lot more went to online. And what we're just now coming out of is seeing what some of the data is on that. Some of that's permanent. Some of it may not be, but that's the question. And in effect, the point is that we may be shifting incrementally to population more than point of sale simply by the nature of the internet. And that's a very fair question. There's nothing wrong with that. We've never held that the distribution formula was a static concept. But that's what Senator Bramble's resolution was about. So I wanted to point that out. His study and the discussion of the change of the formula are tied together. It's just really hard to get data given the nature of the pandemic over the last year and a half. So that's the particular issue there. Everything has to be sourced to a location. Everything has to be sourced to a spot. It can either be your home or wherever the point of sale is, or it can be the store. But everything has to be sourced to somewhere. Now there's some things, for example, some things get sourced to a warehouse. if there are items that have no basic source where the commerce takes place, such as the food trucks, but everything's sourced from somewhere in that regard. So anyway, that's the discussion. It was put on the agenda this last month. They never got to it, revenue taxation. My guess is it's going to be a major discussion item over the course of the summer. Again, it's really linked to this housing discussion. The other issue, of course, is about fees. In Senate Bill 3, I believe, which was the Appropriation Act, there was intent language placed in the bill requiring the state auditor to conduct an audit of fees that are being charged about both the state and local levels. This sort of review has been ongoing for some time. I spoke with Auditor Dougal at length about this. Let me convey the essence of what he is doing. First of all, his focus to date has primarily been on the state. He completed an audit of fees charged at the higher education level. And when I say audit, his point is focusing on, he views that the nature of the law currently, the limited number of cases that exist, require that anything called a fee has to be charged as some form of a compensation for a cost. So what is that cost and how did you arrive at that number? And that's really what he's looking for, is if a city, the state, higher ed, or anybody else charges a fee, what are they using it for, and how did they derive that number? Again, his focus was higher education, and there were a number of things, the things we can remember when we were in school, fees that were charged for attendance, athletics and other things, student fees. How was that number arrived at? Where was the money going? He is currently looking now at the state court system, but he began an examination. I think there were 5 or 6 cities that they used as an initial premise to look at city fees. Again, when we hear about this, the immediate reaction is to assume that it's about development fees and that's the focus. He told me that would be part of it, but he's really strictly looking at the issue of what is the basis for charging the fee? How did you arrive at the number that you're charging, and how was the money used? And frankly, we probably should be doing that anyway ourselves, and the process for approval. He had not prepared or focused on how he was going to deal with cities when I talked to him 2 weeks ago. Just this is more to let you know that it's coming. I think we're much better off if we cooperate and work with him. Frankly, those are fair questions to ask. So anyway, that's the summary of those 2 particular revenue issues. Cam, did I miss anything? I'm sure I did.
Nope, I just put a link in the chat box to Senator Bramble's resolution, and I'm putting a link in a moment to the language on the language that's authorizing the state auditor to do this deep dive on fees, so that way people can see both of those things. There have been a couple of offers from cities to help on the data collection side, but there haven't been any questions. So I think the senior statesmen have delivered, short, sweet, and to the point. So I'll take a hint sometime.
If you just last, some of you may be tired of dealing with issues. I've dealt with this since 1983 on the 50/50.
Well, Victoria, while I track down the language of the data auditor authorization, actually, Mayor Caldwell, that wraps us from the interim issues. We're going to go to CitiesWork. So if it works for you, I'll just let Victoria take it away.
Let her rip.
All right. Thank you. All right. So you've heard a lot, and you're going to continue to hear a lot from us about CitiesWork and reaching out to your legislators. This is a preview of what we hope to have finished by the end of this week of our CitiesWork Stories template. And what this is a template for you to really have the springboard ideas to go talk to your legislators. Some of you are really engaged with your legislators. Some of you might not be engaged at all. And wherever you are on the spectrum, we are putting together this CitiesWork stories to give you ideas of what to talk to your legislators about and how to talk to them. Carson, if you would go to the next. So what we want you to do is to create that relationship. What Cam mentioned earlier, which is if you don't already have one, start building that relationship of trust with legislators now. If you wait till session, it's too late. They are inundated by people like the League, like UAC, like the Manufacturers Association, and it's just really hard to get their attention. But if you already have a good, solid relationship with your legislator, by the time session comes around, they will pick up your call, they will answer your text more readily, and they will see you as a trusted resource. And then once you have that relationship of trust, then we can move to a relationship of accountability when they vote for bills that are detrimental to cities. And I want to echo what John Park said earlier about law enforcement. We're seeing the same thing on these growth issues. The low-hanging fruit is really gone, and now it's just some really tough decisions and some tough policy making. And if you don't have a good relationship with your legislator, they're going to be dismissive of some of the hurdles and issues that you're facing in your communities. So what we're hoping that you will do over the summer is talk about how you are using your ARP funds. Let legislators know where that money is going. As stakeholders, they want to know that that money is not being wasted and want to see how it is being implemented in your communities. Talk to them about growth challenges. Help them understand what is really happening in your community. And it's different across the state, which is why you need to tell that story. The League can capture in a general sense what's happening in our cities, but you can really tell your legislator, let's take a drive down Main Street and I'll show you, here's a development going here. Here are residents that were concerned about this particular project. Here's where we're running into issues with infrastructure. So they can put, visualize what's actually happening on the ground. Talk to your legislators about what state tools would help you. Legislators are elected to office to run legislation. They want to fix things. And so if there is a tool that you need, contact us at the League and talk to your legislator. Help them know, okay, this in state statute is really problematic for how we want to solve this problem. Let's work together. Tell it in person, make that personal connection. And the best way to do this is probably in informal time. Go on a ride along, and as you're in the ride along, they get to ride in a police car, but they also get to hear about the issues that your police officers and public safety are facing, or some of the unique solutions that you've come up with. Take them on a facility tour, take them on a field trip, and then invite them to council meetings. Let them talk about their legislative initiatives, but also let them hear what your residents are telling you at those council meetings. And then keep telling it. Stay in contact with your legislators. This doesn't have to be every week, but if you build that relationship, they will be more receptive to your message during session when we're tackling some of these difficult bills. And then connect your legislators with key city contacts. Give them phone numbers of council members, the mayor's phone number, city attorney, the planner, give them those contacts so that when they see bills pop up in interim committees or during session and they're wondering, how is this really going to work in my cities? They'll know who to call and they'll already have that relationship built. Tie your city efforts to statewide concerns. Legislators, again, they run for state office. So let them understand what you're doing in your community to fix some of these statewide problems like growth. Let them know what legislation would be useful and what's harmful. What you see coming up on the docket during session, if it works for your city, let them know. And then again, we're going to be pushing out our CitiesWork stories and engagement checklist. This will be an engagement checklist, so you can just pull it up each year and from time to time look at it and remind yourself to keep building those communications and those stories. And then reach out and coordinate with your LPC members. So each city has 3 LPC members. make sure you know which one of you is going to talk to the legislators or work together so that it doesn't fall through the cracks. Carson, if you go to the next slide, and I'll turn this over to Susan, who's going to talk about how we, on our end, are going to get the CitiesWork campaign out and help spread the word.
Thanks, Victoria. So when you look at the overall objective, it's to keep local decision making in the hands of local leaders, right? But there seems to be this disconnect for some reason. There are some fantastically innovative projects going on in our cities and towns, but apparently that message or those stories aren't getting through to the people that are making these decisions that affect local authority. So we want to illustrate our work, and we need your help to do that. What we're thinking is, you know, a photo's worth 1,000 words, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? So let's share pictures. Let's share pictures on a regular, repeated basis so that people can see, those targeted people can see what it is that we're doing, whether it's related to housing or water, any growth issue, you know, any innovative project that's going on in your community that addresses the issue that we're being accused of not addressing. So we're going to ask for some of your photographs on a regular basis, and hopefully we'll be doing this all summer so we can keep this campaign going. And we'll share those pictures through our local channels, through all the channels we have, in particularly through social media. And with that, we can target the people that we want you to connect with, and they can connect with you. And we will also include your hashtag or a contact number for you and invite folks to contact you so you can explain what you're doing in your hometown. So this is just one way we thought we could initiate the conversation by making people aware of what is indeed already happening and let them know that you're here and you want to talk. And so if you don't have a hashtag or a handle already, I should say, then get that Twitter account and create a handle for yourself. And we'll start including those targeted handles in our social media posts. And then, like I say, throughout the summer with these photographs and positive examples of what is already going on quite effectively, we will hopefully connect the people that need to be in communication so those conversations can start happening on a regular basis. So it's repetition and reinforcement and that persistence that will hopefully help foster that message. Victoria?
Thanks, Susan. Carson, if you'd go to the next slide. If you're looking for talking points about growth or public safety, we just encourage everyone to go back to our legislative policy guide that we published at the beginning of this year for the session. And I've put the link to that in the chat box. It has some great data about growth, impact fees, state versus local government roles, recent bills that the legislature has passed and sometimes forgotten about in the last few years about transportation and housing. And so feel free to use those facts and take them when you talk to your legislators. And again, we'll be getting the information that we get from our RFQs on our research this summer, and we'll be sharing that with all of you so you can share that with your legislators as well. Next slide. So here is your assignment, but just because you might not see your city's legislator up here on here doesn't mean you do not have homework. There was a robust discussion about growth in the political subdivisions interim committee last week. And that committee committed to talk to the Commission on Housing Affordability and bring reports back from them to try and collaborate or, you know, make sure everyone's on the same track on the growth discussion. And so we're expecting this committee to continue to talk about growth over the summer. We've listed all the committee members there. If you have a legislator in political subdivisions interim committee, your homework assignment is to reach out to them and either talk to them or make sure you have a meeting set up with them before the next interim committee on June 16th. And then share with them what's going on in your city, help them understand what your city is doing with housing and growth, but also help them understand what the challenges are so they have a better picture of what's happening and the reality of what's going on the ground when they go to their interim committee to discuss these issues. So if you see one of your legislators on that list, please reach out to them, get a meeting set up, have a telephone conversation, and help them know who they can reach out to in your city to talk about these issues. If you don't have a legislator, you are not off the hook. We need everyone. We need that league army effort to get everyone to talk to their legislators so that we're not scrambling to whip votes during session on a legislator who's never heard from their community and doesn't have a better understanding of how cities work. Next slide. I'll turn it over to Cam to talk about resolution.
Perfect. Thank you, Victoria, and thank you for all the work building up the CitiesWork effort. One thing I want to emphasize with that Political Subdivisions Interim Committee is that Representative Dunnigan is a former city council member in Taylorsville and has been a rock for local government throughout his legislative career. And he and I were chatting last week about this committee, and he's very excited to have discussion and deliberation in the months to come in that committee around growth. But he said to us, most of my committee does not have local government experience, so make sure that your folks are reaching out to them. Likewise, when Senator Andrick and Representative Waldrop came to the League Board meeting last Monday, they were very clear that they know what sort of influence mayors and council members can have. Senator Andrick, in fact, said that during his 9 years at the legislature, he said, when the league cares about something and you activate your email list and mayors and council members start hounding legislators, those legislators listen. He said this is in part why he and Representative Waldrop want to work collaboratively with local government, because they don't want this to turn into an all-out political brawl. And he even made a crack about how he doesn't want us to activate the email list because he wants us to figure out consensus. So the good news is there's still tremendous respect for the collective strength of the league, and the strength of the league is really you, the membership. The CitiesWork effort is really our strategic approach to complete the narrative on some of these key issues. So that's the external engagement with the legislature. We also have the role of the internal engagement. On the league's website, and the link is on the top of this PowerPoint slide, is an updated league policy platform and resolutions process. Some of you have raised concerns in the past, and they were completely justified about the league resolution process needing to be improved, and so we have tried to improve it. The league policy platform is approved every year by the league membership at the annual convention. And currently it includes principles on housing and population growth and economic development, taxes and water and the like. And this platform really matters, folks. And I'm going to give you an example of fireworks of how the platform can be put into action. It was actually with Representative Dunnigan, former Taylorsville Council member and co-chair of the Political Subdivisions Interim Committee. Several years ago, when we had a really rough fire year and fireworks were the cause of some of those fires, I sat in Representative Dunnigan's office along with other stakeholders from the firework industry and the fire chiefs and other groups, and we were debating whether the legislature should make any changes to fireworks law. Representative Dunnigan turned to me and said, "Where's the league?" I actually handed him our platform on fireworks, and we walked through it point by point. And guess what? House Bill 38, that subsequent session, which Representative Dunnigan sponsored, addressed to some degree every principle that was within our fireworks platform. Currently, our platform is silent on homelessness, and there hasn't been much in recent years on public safety, though the Love, Listen, Lead Task Force intends to address that this summer and bring forward a resolution in September. On the website, you'll see an updated form with some key questions. So when you say to yourself, I'm a mayor or a council member, what do I do? What does it mean to submit something for the policy platform? Well, now on that link, you'll see some key questions asking you about the topic and the specific issue, the problem you're trying to solve, how it aligns with our legislative prism. So it'll help guide you to what makes sense to potentially add to that policy platform. We've also moved the deadline up to August 1st. The reason for this is that will give us almost 2 months before the annual convention to work the resolutions through the process. You as an LPC are the resolutions committee. So on August 16th, whatever resolutions have come through, you'll have the chance to deliberate on those and then endorse them before the annual convention. The league board has an opportunity to review those resolutions. And then if there are any resolutions that make it all the way to the annual convention, the membership has the chance in the business meeting to ultimately ratify them. But this should make the process clearer and more transparent and not as jammed in the timing leading up to the annual convention. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to league staff. And again, there's now more information on the website, ulct.org. Carson, next slide. We recognize that today has been more informational than deliberative. That was in part because we felt there was no other way to get all this information to you, but we expect that August LPC meeting will have more deliberation on the resolutions, and as the different pieces are moving down the pike here on public safety, housing growth, water conservation, and everything else. So that, Victoria, I'll let you give a quick update on what happened last week in the special session and what that means for potential special sessions later this year.
Thanks, Cam. I'll quickly go through these bills. I know many of you were paying attention to HB 98, which passed during session, then was vetoed by the governor, although he promised to bring it back in special session. And we did see HB 98 round 3, I guess, during session, which was HB 1003. This was sponsored by Representative Ray. As a reminder, this the original bill during general session allowed third-party inspectors and required certain deadlines for plan reviews and building design elements. The federal government, FEMA in particular, came out and said they had concerns with the third-party inspector piece. And so the bill that passed during special session took out all the language about builder-engaged independent inspectors, including allowing those inspectors to issue certificates of occupancy. It also did not include the language about natural disasters in construction. So taking those parts out, everything that you saw in HB 98 was passed in HB 1003 in special session, with one other exception, which is on the building design elements piece. It does not apply to townhomes. In HB 98, townhomes were included, but the law that we have now does not include townhomes on that those building design prohibitions. All of the building design elements, the long list that was in 98 is still there, but it doesn't apply to townhomes. This bill doesn't have an immediate effective date. Last I checked, it was still waiting the governor's signature, but I would expect it to be effective quite soon. Next slide, Carson. And then SB 201 and SB 1007. So SB 201 passed during the general session. This was a bill that ULCT did not work on or bring to Center Maine, but it was to change public notice amendments and take out newspaper publication. But the consequence of that is many of those statutes said that you either had to publish a newspaper or physically post for every 2,000 population or mail. And so our clerks and recorders were left with either physically posting or mailing, both of which, if you're in a large city or even not a large city, could be costly and very time consuming. So what SB 1007 said during special session, which is that if you have those notice provisions that require physical posting for every 2,000 population, that is capped at 10 notices. So you're not actually posting all over the place. Once you've hit 10, you're done. It also amended the election code to put back newspaper publication, but only as an option. So it goes back to those 3 options and keeps the physical posting cap at 10. This bill also has an immediate effective date. Carson, if you go to the next slide. And then there were a couple of public safety clarifying bills. HB 1001, what this did is it just made a date clarification that said the 1640 required hours for officer training on mental health, crisis intervention, and de-escalation begins July 1st, 2021. And SB 1004 says lawful permanent residents of the United States can become a peace officer. And this was to clarify that under DACA, certain people cannot carry a firearm. And so to make sure there was, coordination between those laws. Carson, if you would go to the next slide. Oh, and then I saw a question from Clint Drake. So SB 1007, I will try and be as clear about this as I can, but this is fantastic legislative wonkiness. So if you look at the effective date of SB 1007, that's the notice bill. The very end of the bill says that everything's effective now, except for a long list of sections. What happened is that those sections are sections previously amended in other bills at the legislature, and they had a delayed effective date to July 1st, 2021. And so you have, if you looked at the code right now, you would see a section 1-1-1 that's effective now, and then it's going to change July 1st. Well, in SB 1007, the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel said, well, this has to be immediate effectively. So we have to first amend the ones that are in law now, but also what that section will look like July 1st. The bill is effective now. It carries over to how those sections will change on July 1st, and the amendments from SB 1007 will also carry over when those sections, those underlying sections change. I hope that makes sense. If you have questions, you're welcome to call me or email me. I'll hand over to Cam for takeaways.
Thank you, Victoria, and your geekiness, wonkiness moment there made me even more grateful that we were able to hire you away from Legislative Research and General Counsel and join our team. So that was awesome. So thank you for that clarification, and thank you to all of the league team for their great work. So we want to finish where we started. So our key takeaways from today's meeting, Mayor Caldwell and Mayor Ramsey and the rest of the league board, we wanted to lay out what the top policy priorities are, primarily housing growth and public safety today, but related to that, ARP and water conservation. We wanted to emphasize why CitiesWork matters and why it's vital and critical that you tell your story to legislators. Third, in every meeting we're talking ARP because it really touches every policy issue and it affects every single municipality in the state. And then we also wanted to talk to the timing of resolutions and just how the LPC is going to function, and that that Officers Plus concept that I described earlier that will be coordinating all of the moving parts under the board's direction over the next few weeks as these negotiations and deliberations begin on all of these topics. So hopefully we accomplished those objectives. But Mayor Caldwell, I will turn it back to you and also to Mayor Ramsey and the other board members who are here. So thank you for your leadership as well. If you need to contact the league, there's our info. Next LPC will be August 16th. Will be a hybrid meeting with in-person and virtual, and then annual convention September 29th through October 1st. It's right around the corner, but we do have a summer that we need to all try to enjoy before then. Mayor Caldwell, I'll turn it back to you.
The summer being questionable as it snowed at my house yesterday. So who knows whether that's coming or not. It is spring in Utah. I just remind everybody that you do get out of the league what you put into it. So I appreciate all the encouragement to get involved and be active and to do what you can to support it and stay involved with it. And with that, I want to say thank you to Cam and the crew for all of those updates. It was very informational this time. We appreciate that. And if nobody opposes in the chat, we will go ahead and consider this meeting adjourned. Not a single opposed. So we'll go ahead and adjourn. Thank you, everybody, for your time, and have a great rest of your week.